Working with D3 and React can give you the best of both worlds. It gives us all those modules and calculation from D3, and then it allows us to give React to control our DOM using the VDOM, the virtual DOM. And if we look at the example that we created in the first section of this course, we called it Hello D3 Data, and what we did is we created a reference and we return we return a div with that reference, and then we created the use effect, and the use effect is used to add any side effect that you want. And then we call the draw method, and in the draw method we selected the p tag and added to our reference in order to draw our data, right? Remember that? Now with React, it's great that it controls the DOM, and inside of use effect, if you set any synthetic React based event, it's going to clean them up. But we need to tell React when to draw. So if, for example, if I'm going to add a console log just to check when we're drawing, so we can see it on the console, and then at the app tsx, what I can do is I can add some code that will with data. So for example, I can create inside of our function component app, let's create a data object and a set data, and I'm going to use state, and that's going to be of type string array, and then inside the default value, let's set it up to an array of 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I'm going to create a button that every time you press the button, it's going to set the data. So I'm going to use material UI. Here's our button. And I'm going to create, hold on, it's frozen. Okay, here's our material UI button. We have an error here. Okay, and every time on click event, we're just gonna set the data, and I'm gonna set it with the same values. So basically, the data won't change once I click the on click event. I'm really not changing the data. I'm still using the exact same data, and let's call it click. Okay. And now we can create our component hello d3 data, and I'm going to pass the data. So the data is binding to our hello d3 data, and on every click it's going to set the data again, but it's really not doing anything because the data stays the same, right? First of all, we got an error here. Let's update it. There's a duplication, right? So we can collapse and get rid of this one. Okay, now let's take a look. If you look at the console, it drew the first time we're running it. So let's do this again. I'm refreshing the local host, and you can see I'm getting a draw method, meaning our use effect draw got called one time, and we see the results. It got added to our div, those p tags of 1, 2, 3, 4. Now if I click the button, what I'm doing is I'm setting the data again, but with the exact same value. And look here, we got the draw got called again, and every click the draw gets drawn again and again, you could see, but the data is not changing. So what's happening is that React think that we need to refresh the DOM, and it's refreshing the DOM even though there was no change really made. So we basically keep redrawing our DOM for no reason. There's few things we can do. For example, inside of our draw method, we can check the previous data. So if I'm going to create, for example, a previous data array object, so it needs to be the same type as our data, string data, and set it to initialize a new array, okay? And now if I go and I select, I use the d3 select all method, and I pick the p tag, let's add d3. Actually, what we can do to optimize, we can just use select all. So we can just add the select all from the selection method. So if I'm doing, now I have a reference of all the tags that has the p tag, and now I can iterate through each one of those p tag and check and pass the data in the index. And now I can set my previous data with every result. And now that I have the previous data populated, the next thing we can do is we can check and compare. So we can compare, so we can flan the object using JSON stringify and pass the prop data and then compare it with our previous data that we just checked. So we picked up the data from the p tag, and now we can compare it, and only if it's different, then we want to redraw our elements. Otherwise, we don't want to do it, right? Because there's no need to, there was no change. So that way we're in control of when to redraw the DOM. To localhost and refresh, and now when I click, you see the draw got called one time, and I can click as many times as I want, and nothing is going to happen because the data didn't change. So there's no reason to redraw the DOM. Another approach we can take is we can clone the data and check our clone data against it. So instead of doing all this code here that we're really checking the previous data, what we can do is we can clone the data. So we can create another constant, and let's call it data and set data, and then we can use state, React state mechanism, and then instead of a React state, we'll set it the same way as we have it at app, right? It's going to be a string array, and then we can set it for the initial value as an empty array, okay? Or we can set it as the prop data, right? But let's set it to an empty array. And then what we can do is we can compare. The reason I'm setting it to an empty array is that we want the first draw to happen. So if I'll set it to the previous prop data, it won't draw because it's going to compare the first one. You'll see. So now what we can do is we can compare the data with the prop data. So instead of here, we can compare the prop data with our local clone data. And then if there's a difference, then what we can do is we can set the data to be our prop data. That way, now we have the new data updated. And let's take a look. Now you can see when we refresh, the draw got called one time, and I can click as many times as I want, and it doesn't get redraw. Another approach we can do is we can create the same example, the hello d3 data class like we did, but this time use class component. and the class component has already a hook, the component did update, that includes our previous prop and our previous state, and then we can take our previous state and compare it with the new prop. So it has a built-in hook that we can just use in order to show when to update and when we don't need to update.